Hi, I'm Dev,
And I'm Cam.
and you're listening to Criminalish, a true crime podcast where two best friends trade stories ranging from the wild and wacky to the downright messed up.
Do you love listening to the Criminalish podcast? Want to hear more from Cam and Dev? Then consider becoming a subscriber for $2.99 a month. Subscribers will have exclusive access to minisodes, Dev and Cam's live reactions to crime shows and documentaries, as well as early access to any multi-part episodes and so much more. Click the link in the show description if you're interested in subscribing. See y'all in Cell Block C.
So today I will be telling Cam about the murder of Farrah Fratta, which took place in Humble, Texas. Have you heard of this case before, Cam?
I don't think so.
Well, this one's going to be pretty interesting, but I do have quite a few trigger warnings for you today. So today's case is going to cover topics of domestic violence, physical, emotional, verbal, and sexual abuse, as well as graphic descriptions of sexual acts. Please note that none of these topics will be discussed in depth or more than is necessary at the appropriate times. Listener discretion is advised. So, before we get into today's case, what are you drinking, Fran?
I am drinking good old water, H2O, encased in a mystery container since we got some feedback on our use of plastic bottles in a previous episode.
Exactly, because I am also here drinking my H2O in my metal bottle with a reusable straw. So to get into today's case, Farrah Fratta was born Farrah Baker on August 5th, 1961, in Guildford, England, to parents Lex and Betty Baker. She spent most of her childhood in South London and was working as a travel agent by the time she was 19 years old. When Farrah was 19, her father Lex was a businessman, and unfortunately his company was being less and less profitable every year. So he and Farrah's mother Betty decided that they would move to the United States to see if his company would become more profitable over here. Lex already had family in Ohio, but Betty was not too keen on moving to Ohio because it was too cold. So the family settled in Humble, Texas, due to Lex's love of old Western movies, horses, and the great outdoors. So initially, Farrah was very hesitant to make this move to the United States. She had spent her entire life in South London, and she was actually engaged to a man she had known for most of her life. She actually had plans to stay in London with her grandmother, but her father convinced her to give the American dream a try. And she would go on to move to Humble, Texas, which is just outside of Houston, with her parents. Farrah and her fiance did make plans to maintain a long-distance relationship and hoped that he would eventually move to the United States to be with her. So Farrah quickly settled into her new life, and within 1 week of moving to the United States, she got a job at American Airlines, working as a ticket agent at the Houston airport. And she absolutely loved her job, and everyone who met Farrah had nothing but lovely things to say about her. She was described as extremely charismatic, sweet, caring, and overall just the kind of person who was great to be around and work with. So as Farrah settled into her job at American Airlines, she meets a man named Robert Fratta. You look like you have something to say, Cam.
That last name sounded real familiar.
I know, it is crazy, right?
I am locked in and listening.
So, Robert was a public safety officer for Missouri City, which was on the opposite side of Houston, and he was described by most people as tall, not dark, and handsome. He was athletically built and very charismatic, and most people reported him to be quite the ladies' man. And Farrah's coworkers had warned her about his reputation, but despite learning this, Farrah was drawn to Robert, so much so that she wrote a letter to her fiancé in England and informed him that she would be ending their engagement because she had found someone else. Now, funny enough, the fiancé was very understanding of this, as he was also dating someone else.
Double homicide.
Not double homicide. She mailed back her engagement ring, and they both agreed to keep an open mind to see if fate could one day bring them back together. However, Farrah and Robert's relationship blossomed, and after 2 years of dating, Robert would propose to Farrah, and of course, she said yes. Farrah's parents were extremely supportive of the marriage, and Farrah's father was a more traditional man, and he gave Robert explicit permission to marry his daughter under the condition that he take care of his baby girl. The couple would marry in May of 1983 in a traditional Catholic ceremony, and everyone who attended their wedding were super excited about their future together. Of course, the couple had their ups and downs, particularly with Robert struggling to find work and maintaining employment. But they worked through their issues and brought their first child into the world in December of 1986. And 2 years later, they would have another child in June of 1988. But shortly after their second child was born, Farrah let her family know that she and Robert were having a lot of problems, and the two of them would be separating. While Farrah was trying to keep the issues in their relationship private, Robert was openly talking to Farrah's family, stating that everything that was wrong in the marriage was solely Farrah's fault. Despite these accusations, the couple would get back together, and shortly after getting back together, Farrah was pregnant with their third child. And despite Farrah confiding in a few friends that maybe them getting back together and having another child was not the best decision, she stuck it out, and their third child was born in May of 1990. And of course, having another child did not solve the problems in the marriage, and just 2 years later, in 1992, the couple were again talking about divorce. And Farrah actually kicked Robert out of the family home, and he would get an apartment closer to his job.
And did they ever go into what these issues were?
Yes, they did, and we will be getting into those very shortly. From the outside, Farrah's family was completely in the dark about what was going on in the marriage. Robert had told Lex, Farrah's father, that everything that was wrong in their marriage was solely on Farrah. And when Lex pressed Farrah for information, she simply told him, quote, "I cannot live with this man. I don't want to discuss all the whys, but I simply cannot live with this man. I must get away from him. There's so much you don't know, and I cannot talk about it with you. But I cannot live with him." End quote.
Do we know if Farrah tried to talk with her mother? Because maybe she didn't feel like her father would understand, but did she try to talk about this with her mother?
I didn't see much reporting on her having these conversations with her mother, but we do later find out that there is a friend that she confided in and was able to corroborate a lot of the things that she said was going on in her marriage. And shortly after having this conversation with her father, Farrah filed for divorce on March 12th, 1992. And she was awarded emergency custody of the children, and she told her attorney that she was filing for divorce on the grounds of extreme cruelty. And when Robert was served the divorce papers, he threw them on the ground and said, quote, "She will be dead before she ever gets a divorce," end quote. So I'm sure you can guess that the divorce was not pretty.
Right.
And the battle for custody of the children was extremely ugly as well. Through her filings, we would find out that Farrah was claiming that Robert was extremely neglecting the children to the point where he wouldn't feed them if she wasn't around. He also had a pet boa constrictor who had bit one of their children, and he refused to get rid of it after the animal bit his child. Her filings continued by stating that he was taking and abusing steroids, and that made him extremely aggressive. He was a serial cheater who had multiple sexual partners throughout their entire marriage, and that he was emotionally, physically, and sexually abusing her throughout their entire marriage. And while this all sounds awful, the biggest thing that was taken away and cited from her filings is her unwillingness to conform with her husband's sexual desires. So I'm going to go ahead and warn you now, the next minute or so is going to be very sexually explicit. So if that makes you uncomfortable, and it's going to make me a little uncomfortable to have to read this to y'all, please skip forward about a minute to a minute and a half if you don't want to hear the sexual desires. But I will tell you it is important to the story. So according to Farrah's filings for divorce, the actual cause of the degradation of their marriage was because Robert was into croprophilia, also known as scatophilia, which is the paraphilia involving sexual arousal and pleasure from feces. Yep.
We don't like to kink shame on this podcast.
But
however, I think my main concern with that is just general health and safety hazards. That's what I have to say on that.
oh, it's about to get worse, friend, because this is very unsanitary. And just to give you guys a sense of why this particular sexual fetish was way too much for Farrah, according to her divorce filings, Robert, quote, wanted to watch his wife engage in lesbian sexual activities, have her defecate in his mouth, urinate on him, and choke him while he masturbated, end quote. That is directly from her filing in court.
So just a typical Monday.
Oh, it gets better, friend, because it would go on to say that Robert also wanted her to hit him in the stomach while he masturbated, and he wanted her to perform such acts on a daily basis. Yep.
Honestly, the hitting isn't that bad. I'm just still shook from the scatophilia. Because I know some people, they do like to be hit, but I feel like the main thing about the BDSM community is consent.
Exactly.
And if both partners, or if all partners are not willing to consent, then you're on a slippery slope there.
So, as you can imagine, Farrah was not particularly willing to go along with these acts. And ultimately, it would lead to a lot of disdain in the household because Robert would become quite furious that his wife would not satisfy his sexual urges.
Imagine being a child and hearing your parents argue, and your dad is mad at your mom because she will not defecate in his mouth. And he is blaming her for all the problems. Because she won't poop in his mouth.
I mean, how is he supposed to get over that, Cam? It is obviously vitally important to the marriage that she poop in his mouth. And she just won't go along with it. I don't understand what's wrong with her. And on top of him blaming her for their marriage falling apart because she would not satisfy his sexual urges, he also demanded that she get plastic surgery so that she would be more attractive to him. Mind you, he told her this when she was trying to work on the marriage and not get divorced. And very sadly, Farrah actually did go through with plastic surgery in August of 1992. She got breast implants and a nose job with hopes that these compromises would be enough to satisfy Robert.
That is so sad because I haven't heard this story before, but I'm sure that the marriage was still in shambles even after the plastic surgery. I think that anyone who conditions their love on your willingness to literally change the makeup of your body does not actually love you.
Completely agree.
And I'm sure Farrah was concerned about keeping her family together and all of that. But at that point, and even as she noted in the divorce paperwork, he wasn't even a good father.
Exactly.
So what benefit do her kids get from having him around?
And remember, in 1992, they had small children. They had a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 5-year-old. So after getting plastic surgery, she even allowed him to move back into the family home after her surgery, with hopes that they would be able to work on their marriage. But as you can probably guess, this was not enough for him, and he wouldn't let go of his sexual desires. And within 2 weeks of him moving back into the family home, Farrah kicked him out again.
I think her recovery from the surgery lasted longer.
Yep. Now, of course, Robert denies all of the allegations listed in the various divorce filings and stated that Farrah was the one trying to ruin their marriage and raise their children in a broken home. And he stated that he wanted nothing more than to raise his children in a good Christian household.
Where my wife poops in my mouth like a good Christian wife should.
A good Catholic wife, no less.
I'm just saying, scatophilia is a very specific thing to make up, especially in the 90s.
Yeah. So, for reasons outside of either of their control, Farrah and Robert's divorce and custody battle would go on for years. Just to give you an example, one of the attorneys died, a judge died, a judge got sick. There was just a lot of external factors that delayed their divorce and custody battle. And the couple were no closer to having any kind of resolution going into 1994. So, in June of 1994, an intruder broke into Farrah's home through the window. He stated that he was there on Robert's behalf, and she begged him to leave her children alone, as all 3 of her children were in the bedroom when the masked man broke in. He then locked the children out of Farrah's bedroom, where he attacked her with a stun gun for almost an hour before stealing her phone and fleeing the scene. However, Farrah had another phone in her house, and she was able to call the police in sheer panic just due to the traumatizing event that she had just experienced. And Farrah was unable to clearly identify the intruder, but the police began investigating to see who could have broken in. However, the investigation ran cold rather quickly, and within a few months, the police had not arrested or identified the attacker.
And so the attacker wasn't masked, or were they?
They were wearing a mask.
Okay. And you said this is 1994. So when you're saying the attacker took Farrah's phone, that was probably one of those big chunky ones, if not a landline. Because I would think if they took a landline, that would mean they ripped it out the wall. But it sounds like they took her personal phone. And so it's probably one of those big ones.
Exactly. They took her big personal phone.
Got you.
So despite the traumatizing event, Farrah was still trying to collect the pieces of her life and continue to live her life, and expected that her divorce would just be finalized whenever the time was right. She had started seeing a new man by the name of David, and she was starting to imagine what her life could be like if she ended up with somebody who actually loved her and her children. All reporting on David and Farrah's relationship is very positive, and Farrah's children have spoken very highly of David, even to this day. Robert was seemingly moving on too, and he was back to acting like the ladies' man he always was. It is reported that he had sexual relationships with several women at the gym he and Farrah frequented, and seemingly they were both moving on with their lives when a trial date is finally set for their divorce.
So wait, pause. He and Farrah still went to the same gym? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and they were actually regarded as the king and queen of their local gym. And I'm going to show you some pictures later. Farrah's a baddie. She's a baddie. She looks good.
Part of me feels like he did that to get back at her, like dated women from the gym.
Absolutely.
Because he knew that she would find out.
Absolutely. He also dated women who are much younger. I mean, 20 much younger when they're close to their mid-30s. Yeah, just gross all the way around.
So at this point, it wasn't public knowledge that Robert had this fetish?
No, it was not public knowledge.
She a better woman than me. She actually is a better woman than me, because through the mud and back. But I also get that he's the father of her children, so maybe she was concerned about that.
Exactly. This is one case where wholeheartedly, absolutely, she is a better woman than me. But also, to clarify your question, Cam, the divorce and custody battle was not public knowledge yet because they had minor children, so all of the documents were sealed in the case. But the trial for their divorce and custody battle was set for November 28th, 1994. And upon that date, all the information in the filings would become public knowledge. So, despite the ugliness of their divorce, the couple had agreed to allow the children to see both of them. So, on Wednesday, November 9th, 1994, Robert picks up the children, who are 7, 6, and 4, and takes them to church that evening. Farrah decided that she was going to get her hair done while her children were with their father, and they wouldn't be back until late in the evening. So she goes to a local hair salon to get her hair done, and she returns home around 8 p.m. At 8 p.m., she pulls into her garage and opens the door of her car. And as she did, an intruder walked into her garage, approached Farrah, and shot her. She then screamed and fell to the ground of her garage, where her attacker stood over her and shot her again, this time in the head. She then laid on the ground of her garage, bleeding out, while her attacker fled the scene and ran into a silver car that was waiting to pick them up, before quickly speeding away. Neighbors would see Farrah arrive home, but they were only drawn back to her residence after they heard the gunshots and her screams. These neighbors then called the police and reported the gunshots, And they also say that they saw Farrah was down on the ground bleeding. And they saw a black man in a black shirt and black pants hiding behind a tree before fleeing the scene in a silver car that was waiting for him. An ambulance rushes to the scene, and when they first arrive, Farrah is alive, and they make every effort to save her life, and they get her airlifted to the closest hospital. However, shortly after arriving, Farrah would ultimately pass away from her injuries. And police immediately began investigating the crime scene as soon as Farrah was removed from it. And they are very quickly able to rule out that this was some kind of random attack or a robbery. Farrah still had her purse and all of her belongings on her. Her car was not stolen despite the keys being easily accessible. And there was no sign of a struggle near her car or anywhere in her garage. It was very obvious that she was ran up on and attacked very quickly. Police were actually able to find evidence that the perpetrator had broken into Farrah's house through the backyard and was laying in wait for her inside of her own home. They then believe he ran out of her house into the garage, shooting and killing her as she stepped out of her car. Now, I'm sure you can guess who very quickly became suspect number one in this case.
Of course. Our favorite Catholic man.
Our favorite scatophiliac, Robert Fratta. Robert would return to Farrah's home to see the scene, and neighbors informed him of what had happened. And he even called the hospital to figure out what was the status of his soon-to-be ex-wife. And when he was informed that Farrah had succumbed to her injuries and passed away, the nurses were shocked by Robert's lack of surprise or emotion. According to them, he sounded annoyed and impatient. The police also made note of this and did not allow him to leave the scene when he tried. The police then go to Robert to ask him about where he was and what he was doing the night of the murder. And surprisingly, he has an airtight alibi. He was at Wednesday church service with all three of his children, and witnesses were able to put him at the scene for the entire church service. However, despite this alibi, the police were not buying it, and they think that it's a little too airtight. So that evening, the police got a search warrant to search Robert's car, and one of the things they found in his car is $1,000 in cash hidden in his glove compartment, to which the police were really suspicious of, because why do you have $1,000 in cash in your glove compartment? And remember, this is 1994, so $1,000 in cash is roughly $2,100 in today's money. But Robert explains that this money was for him to replace the carpets in his new apartment that he was forced to move into as a result of Farrah kicking him out. They also recovered a notebook that would become important later. Despite this explanation, police took him in for questioning that same night, where they asked him point blank, quote, "Did you arrange to have your wife killed?" End quote. To which he responded, quote, "No, I did not." End quote. He goes on to say that it wouldn't be in his best interest to kill Farrah because he was relying on her to pay him child support in the amount of $700 a month. So based on that, it wouldn't be a good idea for him to kill her.
Why would she be paying child support if she has custody?
Robert had filed for full custody of the children, and for some reason, he thought he was going to win, and he thought he was going to get custody of the children. And he had calculated that her child support to him would be in the amount of $700. So approximately $1,500 in 2023 money. He was also asked why Farrah wanted a divorce from him. And he basically says that there was no love or romance in their marriage. And that while he was able to cope with that and be okay with no love in the marriage, Farrah could not handle it and wanted a divorce as a result. Even though you and I both know that it had a lot more to do with the scatophilia and the abuse, and maybe even the fact that he was a serial cheater the entire marriage. I'm sure those were a little bit more important to her in terms of getting a divorce than allegedly this loveless marriage.
Right.
And throughout the rest of the interview, Robert spent the majority of his time trying to tear down Farrah's character, saying that she was clubbing every night, that she was getting caught up with strange men and having strange men in her home and around his children. And he was saying any and everything to tear down her character. Mind you, she hasn't even been dead a full 24 hours. So after this interview, Robert was released the next morning after 14 hours of questioning due to the police not having enough evidence to hold him any longer. And immediately upon his release, Robert participated in several interviews right outside of the police station about the murder of his soon-to-be ex-wife. And I'm not going to break those interviews down for you because I'm going to let Robert explain himself to you guys.
Fratta was released this afternoon to a battery of cameras and microphones after 14 hours of questioning. He seemed unfazed, though he immediately accused sheriff's deputies of violating his civil rights.
We're not allowed to make any calls. I mean, I thought they might have had a tape somewhere in the room. I kept saying into the tape what time it was, and I want to call an attorney. I was completely denied all that. Like I said, I was beaten, and this was ridiculous. And
he's lying. He's been lying all night. I mean, y'all ask him about calling the attorney. Who's your attorney? He doesn't even have an attorney.
The three children were with Bob Fratta last night during the shooting. It was his regular Wednesday night visitation. According to family members, usually he takes the children to dinner, but last night he told sheriff's deputies that they all went to church. When he did arrive with the children well after the shooting, according to family members, he showed no emotion and no sorrow.
When I first got there, I initially thought it was a drug raid. Everybody looked calm. Nobody was frantic about anything. I saw everything taped off, and I thought I saw Farrah. I still don't know who it was that I saw, but I thought it was Farrah standing there. I was going to actually walk up to her and joke, oh, what do you got, a drug raid going on here?
Fratta is a fireman and police officer at Missouri City. Sheriff's deputies say he knows the routine. Fratta even played to the cameras, wiping a speck of blood from his face after making his accusations about civil rights abuses.
He knows how it goes. He's well aware of his rights. He's well aware of what we can and cannot do. He knows how to make problems, and he's just been real amused by this whole thing.
Farrah Fratta died last night at Herman Hospital of a gunshot wound to the head. Deputies describe it as execution style. Dan Locke, 11 News.
Wow. So wait, he was a police officer and firefighter?
Yes.
That's even scarier. I mean, I can definitely see why women were drawn to him. He has a very aesthetically pleasing face, but watching him in that interview and realizing that even if what he was saying was true, the mother of his children had just been killed. And you would not know that at all.
And since you guys can't see the interview, please note that he is laughing and smiling as he's talking about being beaten and abused by the police officers who were interrogating him. I think that says a lot about a person. So after Robert was released and had a field day with talking to the media, police continued their investigation into Farrah's murder. They were 100% convinced that Robert was involved in some way, but at the end of the day, he had an airtight alibi of being at the Catholic Church at the time of the murder, and he was seen by several witnesses. But their suspicions only continued to grow when they realized that Robert took out a $250,000 life insurance policy on Farrah just days before she was murdered. And 2 days after her murder, he called and demanded the money.
Did she sign that?
I don't know. I do not believe so. I'm 100% convinced he forged her signature, but I do not have any reporting on that.
Yeah. Or brought a lookalike.
That too. And when he was told that he would not be getting the money until the murder investigation had concluded, he was absolutely furious. Farrah's parents were also awarded emergency custody of the children, as Robert was a suspect in the murder. Another thing that made him furious. And he petitioned to the court to get his children back, and he was denied custody because when it comes to child welfare, the courts don't really like to operate on the whole innocent until proven guilty thing.
Which makes sense.
Which makes sense. When it comes to children, you are very much guilty until proven innocent, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I feel like that can backfire in a lot of cases, but in this one, definitely was for the benefit of the children.
Absolutely. So police made the decision to follow Robert absolutely everywhere in order to gather more evidence on this case. And pretty soon after following him for a while, they get wind of him having conversations with people at the gym talking about, quote, knocking her off, end quote. And I'm sure you can guess her is Farrah. And he made statements about wanting her to be, quote, knocked off, end quote, and about wanting to get rid of her, and about how much easier his life would be if she wasn't around. And he said this to over 24 people just in his gym. But the guys at the gym just thought that he was blowing off steam and that he was just saying things he didn't really mean, just because he was so frustrated about the fact that they have been having this divorce and custody battle for the last 2 years. You know, just locker room talk, just guys being dudes.
Right.
They also thought Robert was extremely cool and charismatic. And on top of everything, he's a police officer. There's no way that he would be stupid enough to try and discuss the murder of his wife, let alone talk about it to everyone in the gym and be serious. There's no way he would do that.
Side note, do we know which jurisdiction he was a police officer in? And was it the same as where he lived?
Yes, we do know. No, it is not. And it is not the same jurisdiction that is handling Farrah's case. So after Farrah's murder, his friends at the gym were starting to finally put 2 and 2 together, and they very quickly began talking to the police. And through this investigation, police find and talk to a woman named Minnie Lawrence. And Minnie was Robert's longtime mistress, and she and him had carried on an affair for years leading up to Farrah's murder. And not only was she his mistress, she allowed him to explore his scatophilia, and they maintained a strong BDSM relationship where she was able to fulfill all the desires that Farrah had refused. So that answers your question from earlier, friend.
Deep sigh. Nothing else. No comment.
I feel you have several comments, actually.
No appropriate comments.
There we go. No comments we can keep in the podcast episode.
Right. I will say the one silver lining there is consent.
Exactly, because Remember how in Farrah's filing she said that Robert wanted her to engage in lesbian sexual acts? He was desperately hoping that Farrah, Minnie, and him could have a threesome, and she would be down to do all of the scat-related items he wanted. And it was Minnie who actually refused to participate in the idea of the threesome because she stated that she could tell that Farrah was not about it and she wasn't going to push her on it. So again, consent is important. To me, this is the difference between people who are actually members of the BDSM community and those who just like to do messed up things to people. So while Minnie and Robert had maintained this affair for years, Minnie very abruptly ends all communication with Robert. And that's because he asked her if she could help him hire a hitman to get rid of his wife. And not only that, he specifically asked if she knew any black people who would take the hit.
Why do we keep getting brought in to stuff that has nothing to do with us? I know why. I definitely know why. But it's like, even when racists are deep in their own mess, they still find a way to bring us in and bring us down.
Oh, absolutely, friend. And we're going to get into just a few of Robert's statements and how he feels about good old people of color, because nobody is safe.
Yeah, honestly, his eyes scared me. When I saw him, I was like, yeah, he's an attractive man, but he definitely uses the hard R.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when Robert asked her this, she freaked out and she cut all contact with him because she was under the impression that Farrah knew about her, that she knew about the affair, that she knew that she was satisfying the sexual desires of Robert that Farrah was unwilling to satisfy. And she thought that Robert was a good father. And when he asked her about the hitman, that shattered her entire knowing of this man, and she completely cut him off.
Good for her.
Very much good for her. I do wish she had taken it one step further, though, and reported it to the police prior to Farrah losing her life. But I do respect her getting out and leaving immediately. But it turns out that Robert had asked at least 7 different people explicitly if they would kill his wife for him. And of course, when they said no, he tried to act like he was just kidding, like he was just blowing off steam, and that there's no way he would actually hurt his wife. And just like when he asked Minnie for specifically a black hitman, he had plenty of racist statements to say when requesting his friends kill his wife. He reportedly told one of his friends, who was Italian, quote, "Some Italian you are," end quote, when this friend refused to kill Farrah or put him in contact with anyone who would. It's very much giving that, oh, you're Italian, so you're affiliated with the mob, right? That's what it's giving. And he also asked another friend who reportedly was Mexican, but for some reason, I don't believe that. And I just feel like Robert's the type of man to make anybody who is Hispanic or Spanish speaking from Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
But reportedly, he was Mexican.
And the only reason I would believe that is because they're in Texas.
That's fair. But he asked this friend if he would kill his wife. And the friend refused immediately and asked, "Why would you even ask me to do that? To which Robert responded with, quote, "Because you're Mexican, John. I thought you might know some of your people who would do something like that." End quote. So we've gone from everybody's a part of the Italian mafia to now everybody who's Mexican is affiliated with the cartel. Because why else would you say, quote, "some of your people," end quote? Why else would you say that?
Or just that every Mexican must know a killer.
Duh, obviously.
Right. Clearly. Let me just look in the phone book. I actually have it organized by killers, robbers, kidnappers, just general money laundering, whatever you need.
Obviously, Cam, come on now. That's clearly how it works. It's just always so funny to me when I read like statements of racists and I'm like, why do you even think this makes sense? Like, you said this out loud where other people could hear you because you thought it made sense.
Right. And then also, so we keep saying he's a police officer. Is he like a traffic cop or something? Because it does not seem like the elevator goes all the way to the top with him.
I haven't heard that saying in years. But
my grandma likes to say.
I'm about to say, I was going to say, I haven't heard that saying come out of the mouth of anybody under 70.
We got to bring it back. Honestly, they went off with those. We got to bring it back. I'm going to start keeping track.
No, but actually the way that like my great grandma used to have some sayings. Okay.
But yeah, so the choices he's making, asking people outright to hire a hitman, honestly, you'd have a better chance going to some of the people you've locked up.
I will say I do not know what kind of officer he was. It is reported very differently. Some people refer to him as a safety officer. Some people refer to him as a police officer. I do know that he technically is a firefighter, but I wasn't sure if that was a formal occupation or like a volunteer firefighter kind of thing. It wasn't very clear what this dude did for a living. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Because yeah, it's not giving trained investigator for sure.
Oh, absolutely not. I do know for a fact he was not a trained investigator. Can tell you that for certain.
Because these are rookie, and I mean rookie mistakes.
It's giving you didn't even watch Walker, Texas Ranger. Like, you don't know anything about fake policing. Like, why would you do any of this?
Right.
So in addition to asking his friends to kill his wife and making racist statements in the process, he also made statements such as telling a friend that he always carried his gun on him so that if he were to see Farrah around town, he would just kill her in her car and make it look like a carjacking. He also stated to over 24 people his intention to kill his wife. And you want to know his story and explanation for why he told over 24 people that he was planning to kill his wife?
It was just a long drawn out prank, and Farrah unfortunately died before he got the chance to fulfill it, of course.
Very close. He said that he was telling so many people intentionally so that if Farrah died, the police wouldn't be able to track it back to him because it was so blatantly obvious.
When I made that up, I was like, what is the stupidest reason I can think of? And the fact that the stupidest reason I could think of was so close to what he actually made his excuse is extremely concerning.
Oh, and you're going to love this, boo, because he told 2 of his fellow police officers, so his coworkers, that he had thought about killing Farrah and that surely a police officer would only get 5 years for doing so. So in addition to these statements from many and several of Robert's friends and coworkers, members of his church were also questioned. And they stated that, yes, Robert was there for the entirety of Wednesday's service, but they noticed that he was using the church phone a lot, which was out of the ordinary. And people also said that during service, his beeper kept going off. And remember, this is 1994, kids. So we have beepers. You can't send text messages.
Using the church phone to coordinate your wife's murder, even if he only was going to get 5 years in prison, he is getting an eternity in hell.
Accurate. So, of course, even in 1994, police get the phone records for the church phone. And they see that Robert is making all these calls to this same number. And remember that notebook that the police found in his car? Well, when they look through that notebook, they find the same phone number. So in his notebook found in his car, they found a phone number that matched the call logs, a phone number that he was in constant communication with the night of the murder. And that phone number leads them to a woman named Mary Gibbs. So, of course, the police track down Mary and they interview her. And she didn't tell the police a lot, despite them having clear evidence of her talking to Robert the night of the murder. But despite them not getting much information from Mary, they do learn that she has a boyfriend. A boyfriend who had just gotten out of prison. A boyfriend who worked out with Robert at the same gym on almost a daily basis. And her boyfriend's name is Joseph Prystash. And police begin to think that it's possible that Joseph could be the real killer. There were numerous rumors that Joseph was a former cop who had gotten involved with murder for hire after his release from prison. And I will go ahead and tell you that he was initially incarcerated for armed robbery.
Is it confirmed that he was a former cop?
It's confirmed that he was a cop in the same way that Robert's a cop.
What you put down has been picked up.
Appreciate you, fam. So police begin to believe that they have zeroed in on the real killer. However, they run into another problem, being that several witnesses say they saw a black man dressed in all black running from Farrah's garage, and Joseph is a white man. Police also had no evidence that connected Joseph to the murder, other than the fact that Robert was calling his girlfriend Mary. So police start applying pressure to Mary to try and get her to talk, and she is refusing. That is until the police inform Mary that if she doesn't talk, they're going to charge her in connection with Farrah's murder. And they actually subpoena her before a grand jury just to show her how serious they are. And with the idea of her potentially going to prison for the rest of her life on the table, Mary chooses to talk. And she chooses to talk to the police in exchange for immunity. So the next series of events is from Mary's interview. So according to Mary, her boyfriend, Joseph, was hired by Robert to plan and execute the murder of Farrah Fratta. And in order to carry out this murder, Joseph recruits a neighbor of his to be the actual gunman. That neighbor is 18-year-old black man Howard Guidry.
It's because not only is he black, but also 18?
18.
Oh my gosh. That is a baby.
A child. Somebody's child. Joseph told Howard that if he killed Farrah, he would get $1,000. So the plan was for Joseph to drop off Howard, have Howard break into Farrah's home to lay in wait for her. And then he would jump out to kill her before being picked up by Joseph and driven away from the scene. And Mary gave Joseph her phone, and Joseph would be the one to tell Robert when everything was done. So it looked like Robert was communicating with Mary so much, when in actuality, he was talking to Joseph to make sure that the plan had gone off without a hitch. In her interview, Mary was also able to give police another critical piece of information, and that was the serial number of the murder weapon. For reasons I do not know, Mary saw the murder weapon after the murder and decided to write down the serial number. She gave that number to police, and police were able to track down the gun that was purchased by Robert Fratta in 1982. The gun had never been reported stolen or missing, so according to all records, it should have been in Robert's possession. So the police are like,
"Ladies and gentlemen, we got him."
And they make plans to pick up Joseph and Howard. However, the police realize that they already have Howard in custody, and they also already have the murder weapon. On March 1st, 1995, Howard robbed a bank at gunpoint, and he used the murder weapon to do so. He was quickly arrested the same day, so now police had their gunman and the gun. And when police apply the slightest amount of pressure to Howard and tell him that they already knew everything, Howard cracks immediately and confesses to everything. He even agreed to go back to Farrah's house and show the police exactly how he broke in, where he hid to wait, and exactly how he killed her.
And I'm sure he did not have any lawyer.
Of course not, but they also have him on body cam footage being read his rights and him saying that he understands his rights and that he does not want an attorney.
Because at least an attorney could have negotiated like a lighter sentence, like more leniency.
Absolutely. If you watch some of that body cam footage, I'm not trying to be mean when I say this, I don't think Howard is very smart.
I mean, I don't think so either.
I think there's a delay there. I think there's something wrong there.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that what's his name took advantage of him.
Absolutely.
Because him not asking for a lawyer, him breaking so quickly, him robbing a bank with the same gun that he just used to kill somebody, like it, and him doing this for $1,000, the equivalent of about $2,100 today. No, I don't. I think he definitely had some intelligence issues.
Definitely. I don't have like clean footage of the body camera or anything like that, but it was referenced in several things I watched in preparation for today's case. And in my humble opinion, there is some kind of developmental delay, and I do not think he was really all that capable of actually being able to know his rights and know that what he was saying could be used against him.
Right. I think that it humanizes him, and it's not necessarily like a disparagement to say that somebody might have a developmental delay, because it's something they can help. It doesn't make them less of a person. If anything, like we definitely need to make sure that they have the tools at their disposal. We definitely need to make sure that they have some type of advocate with them, especially in these type of situations. Because it's like, yeah, even though he did commit this horrible crime, I really feel like he was taken advantage of. Because yeah, it just does not seem like he didn't fully grasp the severity of what he was doing, but I don't think that his decision-making skills were fully there. And I definitely feel like if he'd had a lawyer present, there would have been a better outcome for him.
I completely agree. So after Howard hands police everything, he also tells police that he got the gun from Joseph and that Joseph was the only one reporting to Robert. He states explicitly that he did not have any connection or conversations with Robert in preparation for the murder. After gathering this information, Joseph was picked up by police and arrested, where he also confessed to the murder rather quickly. And with Howard and Joseph all buttoned up, police went to arrest Robert Fratta and charged him with capital murder. And on April 21st, 1995, Robert was arrested, and the media got wind of the arrest and showed up to the police station with their cameras ready. So Robert did his favorite thing and played up for the cameras and spoke to the media stating, quote, "These handcuffs are awful tight and I didn't do it. I'm praying for justice," end quote. Also in that arrest, he's wearing like this black tank top, and you can see that Robert is a big dude. He's a large man. He takes up area and he is quite muscularly built. It's scary to think about, like, Farrah was like obviously a very tiny, frail woman, and it's so scary to think about like the circumstances and her fear of him because he was so significantly larger than she was.
It also makes me think that the reason she might have avoided telling her dad about everything that was happening was less because she didn't want him to know the information and more because she was afraid that he might come for Robert and Robert might do something to him.
Exactly. Farrah definitely seems like the kind of person who would prioritize protecting everybody else. So now it's time to get into the trial. All three men would be tried separately, and all three men would plead not guilty to the capital murder of Farrah Fratta.
Not guilty, but you confessed? Okay.
It's a choice. It's a choice. The prosecution laid out all the evidence that I have provided for you today and fully explained how this planned attack and murder of Farrah happened. And the defense attorneys for each of the defendants approached the trial in a few different ways. Robert was the first to go to trial, and the prosecution had many, as well as all the other witnesses, testify about him asking them to kill Farrah or asking if they knew somebody who could. Many also testified explicitly about his sexual desires in graphic detail. And yes, the court transcript is available online and you can go read it. I will not be leaving a link to it. You will have to go find it on your own, you weirdo. Robert's defense tried to say that everybody was blowing his angry words out of proportion, that he didn't mean it when he told over 24 people that he wanted his wife dead. And he also stated that Howard and Joseph were lying and they made up all these plans without him. And after just 50 minutes of deliberations, the jury would find Robert Allen Fratta guilty of capital murder. I know, you're shocked.
Truly, truly shocked. I really thought it might have been possible that he was just angrily talking to 24 plus people about how he wanted to kill his wife. He wasn't serious. And those two guys, they decided themselves to break in and kill his wife that they'd never met before.
I'm so glad you said that, Cam, because it reminded me of something that I had forgotten to mention, which is that Farrah actually knew Joseph and had met him several times.
Oh, I forgot. They're at the gym together.
Yep. And not only that, it is also now known that, remember when Farrah's house was broken into in June of 1994 and she was attacked? That was Joseph who broke in and attacked her.
Wow.
Yep. So on April 23rd, 1996, Robert Fratta was sentenced to death. Howard and Joseph's trials followed shortly after Robert's with much of the same evidence, and they were also able to use their confessions during the course of the trial. Howard's attorney tried to say that he was a young man who was coerced into doing an evil act by Joseph and Robert, and that he never would have done this murder if he was not manipulated to do so.
I think it's interesting that they're still going with a not guilty plea, even with that being their case. It would have made more sense to me to either go for a guilty plea and try him on a lesser charge, or just take a plea deal.
Exactly. Joseph tried to throw blame solely on Robert for coercing him into the attack. Both men would be found guilty of capital murder, and both men would also be sentenced to death. Both families wept in the courtroom as they heard the reading of the verdict. And Farrah's mother actually said, quote, "I cannot wait for the day that I see him laying on the table, waiting to get the injection. That will be justice for me. I'll know for myself that he's gone." End quote. However, 15 years after Farrah was killed, a judge would throw out Robert's conviction when both Joseph and Howard withdrew their confessions. They both stated that they had been coerced by police to connect Robert to the crime, and the judge would find that because of this, neither statement should have been allowed into evidence during Robert's trial. So Robert would go up for trial a second time in 2009. The prosecution laid out a very similar case, but this time they didn't have the statements of Joseph and Howard. And the defense continued proclaiming Robert's innocence, stating that he had nothing to do with his wife's murder. And the jury would later find Robert Fratta guilty of capital murder, and again, he was sentenced to death. Robert would exhaust every single appeal he had, trying to get his conviction overturned again, but they were all denied. And for the next 15 years, Robert would sit down for several media interviews, proclaiming his innocence and proclaiming that he was wrongly convicted and that he had absolutely nothing to do with his wife's murder. And in one of these interviews, he flat out says that he would never be executed, despite the fact that he had been sentenced to death. Despite all the evidence against him, Robert continued to proclaim his innocence. And when his children were adults, and when they finally learned what happened to their mother, they went to visit their father. And during this visit, they asked him, why did he kill their mother? And he refused to answer them, and instead proclaimed his innocence the entire time. After that day, his children never came to visit him again, and they all made the decision to change their names. And they took Farrah's maiden name as to not have any association with their father.
And that's commitment, because changing your name, it is just a lot of paperwork. Like, you have to get a new social security card, all new identification.
Absolutely. But I get it. They were just that serious, because there's no way that you're going to look me in my face and lie to me after you took my mother away from me.
Right. The least you could do at this point is give us an explanation.
Exactly. So, on January 10th, 2023, 65-year-old Robert Allen Fratta was given a lethal injection at 7:25 p.m., and he was pronounced dead 24 minutes later at 7:49 p.m. And when asked if he had any final words or final statements, he simply stared at the ceiling and did not acknowledge anybody in the room. This includes Farrah's parents and all of his children who had come to witness their father's execution. Joseph and Howard still remain on death row, as their execution date has not been scheduled yet. Farrah was only 33 years old at the time of her murder, and she is remembered as an extremely loving young woman who prioritized and loved her children deeply. She is survived by her 3 children who speak nothing but loving memories of their mother. And that is the end of our story, friend.
Do we know if Howard and Joseph's recanting of their confession had any effect on their appeals process? Did they try to appeal? Do we know anything about that?
They definitely tried to appeal, but I don't think it had any significant impact on their case because their confession wasn't actually all that vital as far as evidence go, considering that they carried out the plot. And there was other evidence that puts them at the scene. It was just vital to Robert's case because they were the ones who really set the evidence that he had carried out this plot. And without their confession, he doesn't get connected to the case as easily.
Got you. But yeah, there was still a good amount of evidence directly connecting them.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it was just a sad case. Like, Farrah did not deserve any of that. I mean, she fell in love with this man and started a family with him. Of course, I'm sure when they first met and were first dating, you could never think that something like this could happen.
Absolutely.
And the fact that she came to the US, was reluctant, but came, and this is the American dream that she experienced.
I know.
It's really sad. I'm sure she had really high hopes for her experience here.
I agree, and I definitely think she had extremely high hopes for married life, for life as a mother, for what you're supposed to do when you get married. I mean, she was engaged at 19. I definitely think she had high hopes for her life as a wife and a mother.
Yeah.
And she got stuck with Robert. Any other thoughts, friend?
Nope, that's all I've got.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode. I'd also like to thank Mike from That Chapter and Giles of the This Is Monsters podcast for providing most of the material for today's episode. If you'd like to check out photos related to this case, follow us at Criminalish Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. And don't forget to subscribe to our new YouTube channel to see even more from the Criminalish podcast.
Listeners, if you like what you hear, be sure to leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to the Criminalish podcast. And if you are listening on Spotify, feel free to leave any comments or questions. As always, stay nosy. Bye.
Bye.